The BraveSpace podcast is devoted to the meeting of body and spirit. In a culture of shared respect and love for the life force that moves through us, we move, feel, dance, breathe, touch, and sing in somatic ecstatic prayer. BraveSpace is the place of belonging, safe enough to take the risk of being vulnerable. Hello and welcome to the BraveSpace podcast. I am your host, Matthew Nelson. In this episode, I will bring you the principles of BraveSpace. What does it take to create a space we can take the risk of being ourselves? We can take the risk of being authentic, of being vulnerable, and doing that in a way that's connected to our bodies. So it's not just out here, but it's really how we're living inside our form. And then how do we hold that with others so that it's not my authenticity like going all over you, right? It's our authenticity in collaboration with each other to create the space that's coming through us, the space that is coming through the system of our humanity, which is bigger than any of our individual selves. We are individuals and we are communal. So that's the purpose of BraveSpace, and that's the purpose of these principles. And it's very much at a body, it's a somatic level. BraveSpace is a pan-somatic perspective. It's including lots of somatic influences and systems. I've studied in many different ones, and these principles are bringing them together. Like, what are the core ideas of somatics? Somatics comes from a lot of different movement-oriented techniques and awareness-oriented techniques. There's this connection of movement and awareness that defines somatics, and I talked about this a lot in the first episode. And sometimes we forget the movement side. That's our action, right, is movement. And even our thoughts, there are studies that show we have micro movements to think. There is no feeling without movement. Even in stillness, we're still moving. Life is movement. There are 10 principles to BraveSpace. First is somatic research. Notice the sensations, emotions, images, and movements that arise in your body. Know that the truth of your body can't be manipulated away by your mind. You can't reason yourself out of the truth of your body. It's a kind of a painful thing if we're used to trying to do this, right? And this is why there's lie detector tests. Good luck beating a lie detector test because it's measuring what's happening in the body. The truth of any of our bodies cannot be manipulated away by our mind. So we research our experience by noticing sensations, by noticing emotions and thoughts. Even thoughts can be treated as like a sensation. You know, if we imagine that a thought is similar to like an itch on the arm or like a brush of the breeze. So we notice, and then we can do experiments. I talked about this in the last episode, and that's why this is the first principle, right? To me, this is so much the basis of somatics, to treat everything as a lived experiment and to gather information in order to draw the conclusions that we draw. De-shaming is the second principle. I think of it as an eco-somatic principle. We are animals, we are nature, and we're both wild and civilized. And as nature, we get to bear witness to the divine light and dark that comes through you, through your body. So we end up kind of needing to hold our stories and judgments lightly if we're going to recognize that we are nature, because it's not just about the voluntary decision. There's something coming through here that's so much bigger. So de-shaming's about pulling the story back a bit, judging less, both ourselves and others. We're not going to shame. There's times shame serves a purpose too. It's part of the nature. But we can ask what's under it. Shame comes about when we feel like we're not doing it right, you know? And yet there's that sense of who I am, who isn't doing it right. If there's a little loosening around that sense of identity, then what's it serving in the ecosystem of our human behavior, the ecosystem of our relationality with each other and with all that is. Something's being served here by that behavior. And then we can look for how do we serve that function, what's right about it, in a way that's more efficient, that's more in integrity. We don't want to get blown over by shame into this sense of like, oh, I'm bad. It's like, well, there's some reason why I'm being this way. And so compassion can come in for that. And there can be this ability to recognize what it is serving, whatever the behavior is. So that's de-shaming. And when we see ourselves as living beings, part of a larger living field, then maybe it becomes a little less personal, right? The third principle of BraveSpace is transformation. So you are comprised of patterns. You're made of patterns. We're all made of patterns. We change our form. That's what movement is. It's change of form. So be willing to change your form, face your trauma, the patterns that get stuck, and invite discomfort. When you face those patterns, it's going to be uncomfortable so that you can grow in alignment with your joy, your purpose, and your community and the truth that's revealed. I do myofascial work, working with connective tissue manually, so body work. And in working with the connective tissue, I often think about it as like a river and a canyon. And really, this is the whole of how we are. We are patterns. So the river is the motion. It's the flow. It's the energy moving, right? In the river, it's the water moving. And it's bouncing in certain ways, and it hits some places harder than others, and it washes its way through and creates a canyon. And the canyon is the summation of that pattern over time. And the canyon is what's holding the river. The river isn't a river without the canyon. Without the canyon, it's a lake, or, it spreads out. So it's that containment of the form that gives that energy its flow, that makes it possible for a river to river. The nature of transformation is that there's always this flow moving, and a river doesn't stay the same, right? The banks change and the conditions shift. Now, we can shift in all sorts of directions, and we can make pivots that are really quite wild when all the information, all that's gotten us to this point then is like, well, time to go a new direction. Transformation, the change in form, happens very literally with our bodies. And this is where I love to come back to somatics as movement, like movement and awareness. We can get into these somatic exercises and ways that are very internal, where we're just like noticing a sensation and coming inward, and it's all very good work. But if we really want to work with the patterns, movement is essential. Movement is essential because it's the output of the nervous system. In comes information, out goes movement. And so we change our form. And by doing new movements, we can open up our patterns. Thomas Hanna, who coined the word somatics in the 70s, he was a Feldenkrais practitioner, and he talked about sensory motor amnesia. It was a word he created, like somatics. This idea that he's working with is what he saw with his clients, that he would have someone come in who'd been moving the same way all their life. Like, I remember in a book of his reading about a banker, or maybe it was a pharmacist, someone who had been doing the same job for many, many, many years, older guy. And he'd forgotten how to turn his head. He'd just turn his whole body anytime that he wanted to change direction. And so Thomas Hanna went in there, maybe it was Feldenkrais's book, in any case, and started teaching this guy, teaching his body directly through touch, not teaching through words, but teaching through touch. This is how somatic bodywork works. We teach by creating the motion and creating the sensation. And then the body can go, oh, I'd forgotten how to do that. It's not like the bones changed or something. We've just forgotten. The nervous system and the fascial system all forgot that this movement was possible. Remind the body, and this whole range comes back. Now, there are usually emotions that come up and all of these things that have gotten to be a part of this pattern. But sensory motor amnesia is this literal forgetting. Just like we can forget anything, we can forget how to move. And we get stuck in a pattern. And that doesn't mean it's permanent. So Thomas Hanna's point with sensory motor amnesia is a lot of the things that we say are about aging are actually just that we're stuck in patterns. And we've been around a while if we've aged. But that doesn't mean we need to stay stuck in the patterns. And my personal experience is that in getting older, sometimes I forget to take risks. I'm not used to taking risks as much. It's a practice. When we're young, everything's new and we're more resilient. It's easier to take risks. On some level, it's easier. We have no choice. But when we get older, it's easier to sit back and stop taking risks. And that's, again, why this work is brave. It's why it's BraveSpace. When we start working in these somatic ways to open the sense of possibility with ourselves and with each other, we can move through sensory motor amnesia, right? It is curable much of the time. This has a lot to do with trauma too. If we think about trauma, it's when we get stuck in a pattern because of something, as some of my teachers talk about, that was too much, too soon, and too fast. So we're like, whoa, we freeze up, and then we can't move through that. It's a form of sensory motor amnesia, perhaps. So we can go back and do the processing and notice the sensations will come back in. And that's where we can get kicked out, right? If we're not ready to hold that, and if we don't have the resources to pendulate ourselves in and out of it. Pendulation is a word that's spoken about in a lot of the somatic trauma work, which is to come into one part, what's a bit hard, and then to bring ourselves back to the ease and the grounding and the sense of safety in the body. So all of this is transformation, how we're changing our form. Improvisation is the fourth principle. True power is the ability to be with what is. Not to manipulate it, to be with it, and to make choices from being with truth. So improvisation is the ability to hold this mystery, to sit in the mystery of the space between the little bit that you know and the huge amount that you don't know. The infinite amount you don't know. Moving from the known into the unknown, right? We don't know what's going to happen next, but we have all the information that got us to where we are. We can localize, here's what I'm feeling now. Now what? So it's very in the moment. We have to be tuned to the moment, not grasping for I need to know everything. It becomes this softening into, and here's this next moment, and here's this next moment. And as an improvisational dancer, I am affected by everything in my environment. Here, as I sit here with you, I'm aware of the rustling of the leaves outside my window here in the studio. The environment, the people, when we're with each other, improvisation really takes off because we're always affecting each other. We're tuned into each other. I talk about this as matching often, that it's not that we're copying each other, but we're in relationship. You do something and that causes me to feel something and do something in response, and there's this responsivity back and forth. And so we're matching each other in that. This ability to be with the mystery, to be with the unknown, inviting awe and wonder into that. That's the antidote for the fear, as I see it, right? Because it's scary not to know what's going to come next. Awe and wonder, wow, I don't know what's going to come next. Responsibility is the fifth principle, and I write this response-ability. Responsibility is repositioning yourself in each moment in relationship to others and the world to find your consensual place of belonging, where there's coherence. Where is the right place to be right now? Feeling into that and experimenting and exploring. So the ability to respond and communicate your truth, but don't control others in order to avoid moving yourself, right? It may be internal movement, it may be external movement, but don't try to control others in order to make yourself more comfortable and not need to move. And communicate your truth. So this is responsibility, the ability to respond. It's not I must respond, it's I'm able to respond. The choice is primary here. This, for me, is so prominent in moving with people, in contact improvisation. That's where this principle really comes from for me. In contact improvisation, it's this form where you're moving with someone and you can share weight, but you don't grasp and manipulate. You can roll onto someone. You can learn to share a center. And you don't know what's coming. It's improvisation, right? Contact improvisation. And it's, to me, the ultimate consent work. Consent gets taught often or conceived of as something coming towards you, and you make a choice about yes or no. That's like the dual version of consent. This thing that's coming towards me, is it a yes or a no? And certainly this exists. This is part of the truth of consent. But so often, it's not something coming at us. It's where do we choose to put ourselves in relationship to the entire matrix of what's happening? Where do we choose to be? It's choosing. It's the responsibility. It doesn't mean I'm in control. It means I'm responding to what I can notice is available. And often the piece of responsibility happens by being able to change our view of what we're experiencing. Again, this sense of the power to be with what is, that's where power lies. So then to just look at it a little differently. Sometimes that's available. Sometimes it's not. It's like you just got to wait to perceive differently, to suspend that piece. And sometimes there is the need to respond immediately, right? But in responsibility is not trying to control others. That's not consensual. That's controlling. And ultimately, we're in a collaboration all the time. Now, I'm not telling you I'm perfect at this. These are principles that are about somatic relationship. And sometimes as I'm speaking them, I'm like, oh my God, I know all the times I mess this up. Of course, I'm not going to get these right all the time. This is what I love about principles. It creates something we're going towards and can organize by and can improvise with. They're open and mobile. It's not always cut and clear what exactly is the right thing to do in any situation. So responsibility is part of why these principles matter to me, is to have some sense of where I'm choosing to be. It creates some clarity and openness to what is, to be able to improvise. Heart-centeredness is the sixth principle in BraveSpace. Approach your heart as a gateway to spirit and into the communal. So there's the individual self, and then we're participating in this communal. We'll get to the principle of interbeing, which is really about this. And so the heart center is the translator. It's the path between the personal and the communal. We can function and we can serve beyond the limitations of our personality, our sense of identity. We still have our personality and identity, and there's something more. The heart is the way there. This one's so experiential. It's so hard to talk about the heart center in a meaningful way because it is an experience. I've been studying heart-centered meditation with my teacher, Anne-Marie Chiasson, for almost 5 years now. It's really like just sitting here in the heart. You might take your hands to your heart now if you're in a place to do that. Right under left, thumbs touching. The heart center is the energetic center point of the body. in a lot of ways of seeing. So in the chakra system, it's the fourth of 7 chakras. It's right in the middle. It's different than the center of our weight, which is down in the belly, like the lower dantian, or there's so many ways to talk about that. The heart center has these qualities, having sat in it and what I've been inducted into by my teacher and feels true for me, is there's unconditional love, this awe and wonder. Talked about that with improvisation, the awe and wonder in the unknown. And so unconditional love is this awe and wonder in relationship to all that is, to just hold it in this nothingness. It's the void. From this unconditional love, as it begins to move, right? As we go into movement, and here we are dealing with the body and movement, energy moves. It becomes healing presence. And healing presence is the life force. We live. And we can't explain it. It doesn't make sense, but we can sense it. So the presence, the ability to be with that, is the miracle of healing. I watch my being heal from things. You watch your being heal from things. It's astounding that we're here. So healing presence is this movement in the void of the life force. Being with healing presence, the life force moves. We are alive. There is this miracle. And then there's innate harmony. Innate harmony. I like to think of it as where all our voices meet, where all the voices of the universe meet. It's the still point in the midst of chaos. It's the eye of the storm. It's when people say everything happens for a reason, what we're really referencing is innate harmony. Doesn't mean it's easy. It's just recognizing this is kind of the divine mechanic of things. There's innate harmony. It all keeps going. And we don't always know why. So we can find that access to that is available in the heart. It is a gateway. Oftentimes I hear my teachers call this the gateless gate. Through this eye of the needle opens again into the bigness, into the fullness of compassion. It's fluid. It's overflowing. Compassion is the fourth quality of the heart center. Compassion for me comes in waves. And it starts with self, right? So compassion for self. Then it can overflow to others. Compassion, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's going to say the ability to suffer with. That's not comfortable. But there's this ability to then, can I suffer with myself and be in the beauty of that? Yeah, compassion. There is a fifth quality of the heart, which is sort of when all the rest of them come together, and it is at the core of BraveSpace, and what it is I find myself studying in it is selfless service. And it's not self-defeating service. Self is part of the service. Self is part of the whole, but it's the relationship to the whole. It's that we are trees in the forest. There's a humility in that, right? Always studying that one. So that's the heart center. And instead of layering these things on it, one way to work with these qualities is just to ask, are they here? To come to the heart. And I find it hard to do when I'm really anxious or something. And when I can crack through that wall, it's like, oh, it's home. Tensegrity is the seventh principle of BraveSpace. And it's really coming from an architecture of the body and that's available in the world. It was popularized by Buckminster Fuller, yet also really discovered by his student Kenneth Snelson. The idea is that there are these struts, compression elements, that are suspended in a network of tensional cables. So that's tensegrity as like an architecture, as a sculpture. So these compression struts float in the tension of these bands that are holding them. That's how Kenneth Snelson and Buckminster Fuller were using it. then it started to be discovered that this is actually how our bodies work. So our bones are in the connective tissue, and the connective tissue is tensional, and it's tensioned through the whole system. It's a systems way of understanding, and that causes the bones to float. And when you stand on your foot, for example, there's actually experiments that have shown the space in your knee doesn't compress. If it were a stack, that space would compress. But because of the tensional integrity of the connective tissues, it actually pulls apart, which is amazing, right? The space opens. Wow. So this is a systems way of understanding in which there's this relationship between everything and there's space. It generates wholeness and the sense of the whole, right? My body's whole, I'm contained. I'm not bleeding out. I mean, that seems obvious, right? Of course. But wow, I'm not. Like, there's containment. I can be here. I could also be, I'm not going to do it right now, but I could stand on my head, or I could be on one arm or something. We can be on all these different surfaces. If you took this building and put it on its side, it would no longer be whole. It would lose its wholeness. It would collapse. So living systems have this amazing sense of wholeness that comes from our tensegrity. That's how it's created. So there's a tension of opposites, right? Tension is central to how this works. There's pull in different directions. And so that gets into the metaphysical. That gets into the mystery of how we engage with our world, because there's often a this or that. We need to resolve the tension so often for the mind. But the truth is we're in tension. I mean, which brings some awareness to the word intention. What's in tension for you, right? What's in tension for me is to explain this principle right now. And I can feel as I'm talking about it how complex it is. And I want to be really clear. But in the clarity, I wouldn't want to shut down and not give you the pieces you need. So in tension, right, there's these different forces, and we're navigating them all the time. So the ability to hold the tension of opposites in our thoughts and our way of engaging with the world, as well as very much in our body, and this is key to efficient movement, holding the tension of opposites. That direction and that direction. And that's how I can find space. That is a huge principle in BraveSpace. And it's also about how we're engaging with each other, right? In a room, the tension between people. What happens when we get in conflict? There's huge value, obviously, in conflict. And it's hard to hold. And our emotions get all riled up. The ability to do that is huge. We could talk about politics, right? And this side and this side. And some of my favorite people, like Charles Eisenstein, talks about this all the time. What is it that both sides are agreeing on or not even looking at that's bigger than the polarity? So we hold the polarity and look around. What else? Tensegrity. The 8th principle in BraveSpace is risk. The truth is you're going to die. So risk is constantly bumping up against fear. And if you can embrace fear and not be led by it, then you can engage consciously with risk. Embrace fear and you can engage with risk because you're going to die anyway. And BraveSpace really is about this risk of feeling, this risk of finding out the vulnerability. Who is this? Who are you? How are we engaging what's true right now? To hold a brave space is to be willing to take the risk of all these things. None of us are getting out of this alive. So if we own that, if we really register the truth of it, then we can stop trying to control it all and recognize there's a beginning, middle, end to everything. Everything is phrased. So I talked about phrasing briefly earlier. Phrasing is the beginning, middle, and the arc. We have it in music. It's where phrasing is taught the most. It's also taught in Laban movement analysis, which is a movement, a somatic language that I'm trained in and that shows up a lot in dance academia, theater academia. It's been around for over 100 years. And we can talk about the phrasing of movement. This to me is one of the movement concepts that we just don't talk about enough in our culture. But we do, like in baseball, you swing the bat and the first lesson you learn, in baseball is to follow through with your swing, or in golf, follow through. That's phrasing. That's to understand the moment you hit the ball isn't the end of the phrase. It's actually in the middle of the phrase. So how we initiate and begin a movement and where we're going with it, which has to do with our intention. What's intention? Where are we going with it? This is the beginning, middle, end. And there's risk. You initiate something, you don't actually know everything that's going to happen. You're not in control the whole time. We set something in motion, and then we follow through. Embrace fear without being led by it. The fear is going to be there. Fear is going to be there. And then we want to know, like, fear is smart. Doesn't mean do everything you're scared of. Check in. What's that fear serving? We don't want to shame ourselves for fear. We can get under it, de-shame the fear, and ask, well, what's it serving? Oh, it's actually keeping me from doing the thing I want to do to keep me safe. Well, maybe I need to do that thing, right? Embrace the fear. But don't be led by it. Don't just do things because you're afraid, or don't do them because you're afraid. Either one is being led by the fear. It's like holding the tension, right? The tensegrity of fear. The 9th principle of BraveSpace is Eros. To me, Eros is the life force and it's longing. I carry a lot of longing. So I've really been like looking around, and I don't feel like there are a ton of models for me about how to hold my longing, my erotic energy, my charge, which includes sexuality, but it's not just sexuality. To hold that charge without shaming it and without shutting down around it. I think we're very scared of Eros because it's so powerful. It's such a powerful motivator that there can be a shutting down and a not allowing it its potency. And instead, I go, how do we embrace this and hold it with responsibility? Not be trying to force anything. How do we hold it with genuine consent and consensus? Certainly there are many people doing this beautifully who I've studied with, and it's amazing to me. It feels like in the somatic field, as there's more erotic work coming in, there's like these somatic erotic trainings that are one part of the field, and then there's these more academic and psychological trainings that largely leave Eros out. I don't believe we can leave it out. It's really important to recognize the power of this, or else it comes up in the shadows. It comes up without, we kind of pretend it's not there, and it's the elephant in the room. Eros is often an elephant in the room. At ecstatic dances, I find this so fascinating that here we are, this group of people just getting down to those oftentimes bassy, pelvic-oriented music. The bass is low. It resonates in the pelvis, and you see everyone moving. And that's a place where Eros is often moving. And sometimes it's shamed in those cultures, and sometimes it's embraced. And I've been in many different subcultures of the ecstatic dance and contact improvisation scene. It's amazing to watch how it's handled differently. And I've seen incredible beauty where it frees and people grow. One of the things about being a facilitator in somatic work, and particularly somatic work that is embracing Eros, is having to be so clear about the intent and how it's held. Here's how I've written about it. Follow your joy, pleasure, vitality, and longing to develop loving fullness within yourself. Connect your sexual essence first to spirit within. So that's the sovereignty. First to spirit within, so that you have capacity to love and attune with others generously. So that capacity to be able to connect my life force with the divine and then attune and meet others from that. So I'm not trying to get something. That doesn't mean I don't desire. And doing this perfectly, I don't know about that. But the more I've practiced, the more it's available to me. And I watch people who I hugely respect living this. And yeah, that's Eros. The 10th principle of BraveSpace is Interbeing. You are simultaneously an individual and a part of this collectively animate world. Speak, listen, move, feel, and be willing to change your mind. On some level, I think of this as a summation of all of the principles of BraveSpace. The purpose of BraveSpace is to recognize the interbeing, to recognize that we are individuals and we are collective. And boy, I'm always trying to teach myself this one because I can get stuck very much in my individual self. And the last time I held a big group, it went beautifully well. I got to the end and then it was over and I lost that piece. I like checked out for a moment and I took something personally that I shouldn't have taken personally. It was just the response of the field to ending. And I went, oh, it was a huge lesson for me. There is no beginning and end to interbeing. So in holding brave spaces, being able to hold that sense of like, it's not personal. I mean, this is in the 4 agreements. If you're familiar with that work, I can't remember his name right now. But in the 4 agreements, he says, don't take anything personally. And this is because we are collective. Where I really appreciate interbeing, the more I've been exploring it, and I've written about all these principles, and interbeing's the one I still need to write about, is art is about interbeing. It's the way we're affecting each other. Like, we make art together. I mean, that's my favorite with dance. But sometimes we make art and then share it with someone, and then they experience the art and have an experience that's often not quite nameable, right? Life is this art, and we access that piece of what we can't quite touch in the space between us, the space where we come into the wholeness larger than ourselves through art. Art, poetry, music, all of these are art, right? Dance, where we get to practice interbeing. Inherently spiritual to me. Because again, as I said in the first episode, working with spirituality is working with the frame larger than my life. And by my life, there's that sense of the individual part of it, and the forest and the trees. The trees in the forest. Yeah. So that's interbeing. All of these principles form a guideline, a sense, a field of how we can be with each other. And that field is created here first. And heart center, right? I'm touching my heart center. It's created in me and all the parts of me, not just my heart center, but that's the energetic center. And it's the place of connection with each other. It's one of the places. Could also say we go up through the head, we go down through the root. Arguments for all sorts of versions. I'm polycentric. I believe we have many centers that are in resonance, that are initiating, that are supporting. Multiple centers. In all of them, this connection to the whole. So I hope this is interesting and useful to you. I hope you can hold some of these for you and know these principles are on the website at BraveSpaceSomatics.com. I will be offering some workshops through them, particularly for facilitating yourself to facilitate others. That's my passion with this work. The way we're holding each other from a place where we're not manipulating each other. That piece of responsibility. I'm not exactly sure what episode will come next, but I've got a number of sessions with various friends of mine in the somatic fields, and these principles will move through that. So there will be an expansion of this work as this podcast continues. The podcast will always revolve back to these principles, and these principles will grow through this podcast and these discussions. Thanks for being here. Till next time, I'm Matthew Nelson.